and simulcast on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Now, here's Thomas Frank Carr and Landon Tangwall.
Penn State has one final tune-up before the 2020-2010 football season, and boy, are they going to need it. A surprising need in this part of the 2024 season, because star safety KJ Winston, we found out on Wednesday, is done for an extended period of time, a long-term injury, says head coach James Franklin. Everyone wants to know, what does that mean? We don't know, and that's the whole point. So we're going to be talking about this today to start the show. Of course, I'm here, Thomas Frank Carr from Blue White Illustrated on the Penn State Football Tailgate Show. Thank you for being with us if you're here on 99.5, The Bus, Bigfoot Legends, or the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. And Landon Tangwall from Behind the Wall podcast, thank you for being here as always. Your thoughts on today and this game as we get started?
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity today for Penn State to prove that they are truly a top 10 team. I think after last week, 2 weeks ago with Bowling Green, there's obviously some concerns. I think Bowling Green was a really good team, and I also think they're probably going to win the MAC conference. Now, I think that's why a lot of people are cautious, because you see Kent State, now they're a MAC team as well. But really, Kent State is not a good team at all. They are 0-3 at the moment. They're coming in here after week 0 getting throttled by Pitt, 55 points put on them. Then you go to St. Francis comes to town. And St. Francis, T. Frank, they've had a college football team since about 1927. That was their first ever FBS win against Kent State about 2 weeks ago.
You never want to be the first ever in those situations.
It's scary. And then we saw Tennessee last week. I think a couple people might have maybe caught a drive before you turned it off. But
yeah.
Tennessee put up about 65 points at halftime on Kent State.
And can I tell you something?
Yeah.
I think they missed a couple of plays in that game. I was watching back to kind of get ready for today and for the show and for the game, and Nico Iamalava, good quarterback, freshman, they could have put up 70 in the first half. Like, that's how my assessment of this Kent State team is. It maybe wasn't even as drastic as it could have been last week.
No, I agree with that. And honestly, watching the first two drives were funny. They ended both drives, Kent State, their first two, with fumbles. The first one they fell on third down. The second one, they were on about their own 20-yard line, and the center snapped it so high over the quarterback's head, it was a safety. So, I mean, it is kind of a comedy of errors, but I think that is where Penn State can get going today, and that's how you get to those 66, 70-point wins against these bad teams. Is the defense is creating turnovers, and the other team is just having a ton of mishaps. You're giving Drew Aller the ball on, plus 20-yard line, that type of thing, allowing them to have quick scores. That is how these games start to get out of hand quickly, and you really are able to get your team, all your starters, out of the game by halftime, and that's kind of the goal. I mean, I'll tell you, going into this, it is the older guys going around, they're dapping up the younger guys saying, hey, be ready by halftime, and that's the mindset. You don't want to be in these games. Like, when you go into halftime, it's like, I'm not getting ready again to play. So, we better go
I'm taking a shower.
Yeah, so it doesn't always work out that way, as you saw last week, or, even in years past. I remember, like, Ball State a couple years ago. Like, we play a lot of MAC teams. They're not bad teams at all. They recruit really well, and now, they don't have a ton of NIL, but NIL and transfer portal as a whole has now changed the whole landscape, where better players leave. If you're second string at a place, even like Penn State, you go to find other opportunities now. It's a lot easier to just leave and go elsewhere. So I think that's why you're starting to see these MAC teams start to compete a little bit more. And, we also get to see Bowling Green at Texas A&M today, so we get to see if that Bowling Green team really might be worth something. And then if so, did we, play a good team? Obviously, we didn't do what we thought we should do. But I think that was a good team last week. I don't think this Kent State team is a good team in any way, shape, or form.
There's something about that game last week that I think is important to know. That the loss of KJ Winston in that second quarter caused a dramatic cascading effect on that defense. And that's kind of where I want to start today, is talking about KJ Winston, his injury, and the psychology of that impact on the team. Kent State is not a good football team, as we just outlined, and it's not just that they don't have good players. There's a lot of things structurally that I think are wrong with this team on a couple of different levels. But to be dealt a blow like that with your best defender, or one of your best defenders, if top two here, talking about on the defense, what is it to the psychology of the team to lose one of your leaders and one of your best players this early in the season?
I mean, I'll say it. I think he's the best player on the team. That's how I feel about KJ Winston. It hurts. It's when it's the leader and it's the best player. It is just it's a big deflating letdown. That's what it feels like, where it's like, dude, because it just takes away, you feel like you have an opportunity going into every season, especially when you are starting out undefeated. You have all your guys, and little things happen, whether it's a loss here, an injury there, and those things, those build up to then derail a season.
Yeah.
And I think, that's what we need to stay focused on, and the players in the locker room do need to stay focused on, he's injured. Whether he comes back or not, we don't know. But, he's not here right now. You can't focus on that. So if you're out there at all thinking, oh, we would have made that play because of KJ, something like that, that is where you cannot let your mind wander and kind of do that. So it's next man up mentality. And we can
I want to ask you about next man up mentality, and that's I guess my question is, how much is it we have to have that mentality, so you mentally can't think about the realities of what you have lost. And this defense has lost a lot too. From the front, losing defensive end, linebacker, losing Keon Wiley during the spring, losing Zariah Fisher during the spring. So depth has been an issue for this team already, and then to lose a starter like this, I guess I don't even know how to ask the question. How do you do that? How do you stop yourself from saying, well, here are all the things that have happened, instead of just going next man up mentality and brushing it all off? Because it seems like there has to be a line of understanding you have lost something important and you can't be the same team as before, but also not giving in to kind of the excuse train of now we have to find a way to win no matter what.
Yeah, let's look at it from a player perspective for a second. And, as much as your teammates and your brothers, that other guy, they're competing their butt off because they're trying to get to the NFL. It is not, when fans think of it from their perspective, it's, the team as a whole. As much as everybody's committed to the team, there's definitely still some eye in it. That is why you play the game.
Yeah.
So I think that is one thing to think about is Dejon Lane, Zakee Wheatley, they are trying to make an impact, and not just for the team, but for themselves too. It's not always.
This is an opportunity for them.
It's an opportunity, exactly, and that's how it works. Marcus Allen got, I think, some of his first burn, and he was a freshman playing some safety because of an injury. That has happened in the past, and we've seen it honestly a bunch at Penn State up to this point, where guys get injured and guys step up, and then they'll stay there. And so that's kind of my prediction for, honestly, Dejon Lane, who's someone who's a true freshman, but he has really impressed the coaches all throughout camp. And even just talking, I've been in the barbershop just shooting it with a couple of the players, and they're telling me, hey, this kid is impressive.
Yeah.
That gets me excited, where it's not just media stuff. When you get asked about a player, they asked about a freshman. Yeah, he's doing really well. I was asked about many freshmen, and they were struggling, and I said they were doing well. If we're just going to call a spade, that's how it works.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean too much to me, but when you kind of just hear it casually, and the coaches are really harping on it, though, that starts to actually mean something. And I think he and Coach Franklin said in his presser this week, Dejon Lane is going to be very important to this team, especially down the home stretch. So now is the first opportunity against a bad team to start to build that confidence a little bit. And a team that has not passed for over 200 yards up to this point, and they played an FCS program. So, clearly the passing attack of Kent State is not very high. Here's an opportunity for Dejon Lane, Zakee Wheatley to build up their confidence. Let's get some turnovers, and then that's a way to route them and put up 60, 70 points when you get those constant turnovers and are putting the offense in good position.
That confidence, I think people underestimate two things: the learning curve for football and how hard it is as a freshman to come in and play a position like safety that has a lot of complexity to it. But then the confidence of, once you do understand how much your physical ability does take over. You can see a literal difference watching guys like you when the light turns on and when you start playing fast, because you understand and you're not reacting to everything around you. And I think that's really the goal, is maybe not to get Dejon Lane up to an all Big Ten level, but get him to a point where he's not thinking anymore as much about what he's doing, and he's doing what he's supposed to be doing. It's funny, you mentioned, I made the joke earlier this week, if you squint a little bit, Dejon Lane kind of looks like KJ Winston. He's 6'2", 212, and he's a freshman. It's crazy. He has a lot of really great talent and a lot of great potential. It's just how much that, how much can you pour into that guy, and how much can you fast track his learning process, which takes time to get the ins and outs and the nuances of football. I want to go into a little bit of maybe something from KJ's perspective, because this was something he tried to play through. We watched him play in the first half against Bowling Green in the first quarter. And starting left guard here for Penn State football in 2021, had to shut it down for the season. What is that news like when you get it?
Yeah, it's definitely it's hard, and especially when you're if you're in a year where it is also possibly like an NFL year, it can be difficult on your mindset. So it's definitely important you stay around the guys and kind of keep that mental up. But you're always kind of going to be down, and you're not really yourself when you're someone. Think about you as a football player. That is your identity. That is what as much as you can say you don't want it to be or it's not, it is, because you've been doing it since you were 9-10 years old.
Yeah.
And that is really all you know every day. You're on a clock, you're on a schedule, you wake up, and I look at my phone, and Chuck Losey has told me where I'm doing what today. So that's
how can it not be your identity when it's literally all you do?
That's all you do. You don't have time for anything else, and anything else you do is surrounded by that, whether that's nutrition, whether that's like hydration, whatever, stretching out, rolling out, taking care of your body. So also, that kind of like goes away. I mean, you can still do that, but you almost don't really need to. Like, there's not as much when you're hurt, so you get out of your routine and you start to. It just takes you out of the football a little bit, and so when you lose yourself, it starts to get difficult. So I think the hard part too is like if KJ Winston, who knows when he's coming back, but he's a captain on this team, and that's another piece of it. Is you lose that leadership on the field. It's just not the same thing when they're on the sideline and that guy is back there and we're thinking, hey, we got an All-American on our back end that he can cover me up if I make a mistake. Well, Dejon Lane is going to be really good, and we got some other good safeties, but I don't think anybody is KJ Winston. So like I said, I do think he is the best player on this team. So it's a big blow to this Penn State team as a whole from a leadership standpoint, and a big blow to this Penn State defense.
I did some this is my version of investigative journalism. And I went back and I looked at how Penn State played the first two games and where everybody lined up and how they were playing. And if you want to go get that information, by the way, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. If you're listening here on the radio, if you're on the YouTube stream, you can sign up now for just $1 and get 2 months of access to all of our premium content. You can go read about this, but basically, losing one player in KJ Winston meant they lost 3 different starting positions because Jalen Reed had to go play KJ Winston's position, which means he couldn't play either of the 2 positions he was playing up to that point. And in the Bowling Green game, I'll give you this one here. There were 2 plays. You wondering why Bowling Green got 20 yards on one drive and then got a touchdown? Penn State lined up with 10 men on the field twice in a row because they lost their starting captain, and then Tony Rojas was banged up in that game and couldn't go in. So they literally didn't have enough men, and they couldn't figure it out in that to start that drive how they were supposed to line up. Once they got all that stuff figured out, once they got the communication down, which we've talked about this week as well, the third quarter, they allowed 6 total plays. So I think when we talk about Bowling Green, we talk about this defense, we talk about the way they adjust and adapt, we have to keep some of that in context of that was I've never seen that before, especially from a Penn State team that is typically buttoned up from those aspects. They don't make a lot of those mistakes over time. So I'm interested to see how the defense from a communication standpoint has improved today. When you make those adjustments and you have a week, you have a bye week, you're going into this game, and you're Jalen Reed, who's the captain of the secondary from a communication standpoint to begin with, how much more can you do and feel comfortable after what I just kind of described there? How much different would it be this week as opposed to in the middle of it happening?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you have time to adjust. You have the bye week as well, so you kind of start to feel what that is like without your guy back there. But at the same time, like you said, we have Jay Reed, we have Zakee Wheatley, and these are guys. I think Jalen Reed is also one of the best safeties in the country. I think when KJ Winston was healthy, we easily had the best safety tandem in all of college football. But it obviously it does hurt the defense, and it limits you on some of these things that you can do. And we talked a lot about the 4-2-5 defense that they wanted to run, where we got all 3 safeties on the field. Well, maybe you don't see that as much now, and now you're kind of more limited to stay in that 4-3. That's what we traditionally have run here at Penn State. But I think it hurts for Tom Allen. But also, I like what I saw from Tom Allen. They went into halftime. There was a little bit of an adjustment, and also the cool part about now is there is this on-field technology where you can look at the plays on the sidelines. You know those tablets that you see Tom Brady and Peyton Manning in the back in the day spike into the bench when they threw an interception.
I love that's what we think about, too, with the tablets. It's almost them getting destroyed.
Yeah, because it's, they always show them after a quarterback throws a pick. We now have those on the sidelines, so there is more opportunity for these coaches to adjust in-game, and it's cool to see that Tom Allen, he struggled in the first half, but guess what? He came out, he allowed 3 points. He had 2 turnovers. I mean, barely allowed 100 yards. Like it was a really good second half from Tom Allen, and I feel like the team kind of rallied around the guys they had out there and didn't worry about KJ Winston injury. And I think that is something that, especially when guy gets injured in the middle of the game, dudes on the field are worried about it. They're asking on the sideline, how is he? What's the injury? That type of thing. Like guys want to know. So that does affect you on your mind, and it's on your mind that, oh, maybe KJ's not back there right now. Maybe my butt isn't covered as good as it was when KJ was there. So there is definitely some of that worry when you have your superstar no longer on the field.
One thing that will help any defense, score a lot of points. And we're going to talk about the Penn State offense coming up next on the Penn State Football Tailgate Show, powered by Blaise Alexander Family Dealerships. Before we get to that, we do have the this Penn State practice update, talking about some of the things we talked about here in the first segment of the show, and some of the things we're getting to next as far as players on the offensive side that are back. Speaking of back, we'll be back on the Penn State Tailgate Show, driven by Blaise Alexander Family Dealerships on 99.5 The Bus, 107.5 The Bus, Bigfoot Country Legends, and streaming on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. The biggest story this week from Penn State football open practice was the absence of star safety KJ Winston. The team's top defender suffered a long-term injury before the Bowling Green game and won't be with the team this weekend against Kent State or for the foreseeable future. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. This is your Penn State practice update from Blue White Illustrated. Want to be the first to get Penn State practice info? Subscribe to Blue White Illustrated for just $1 using promo code PSU1 to get access to premium content for 2 months. That's 2 months for just $1 with promo code PSU1. After practice on Wednesday, head coach James Franklin discussed the contingency plans for replacing Winston in the defense. The fastest option may be to get a key freshman ready.
I think we've talked a decent amount about Day Lane. So that'll have a huge impact on him and the reps that he's getting and where he's at. And then we're trying to kind of figure out that next guy.
But in the meantime, the loss will have a ripple effect on several positions. The results may shift the Penn State defense into a familiar look for fans.
With Jay Reed's size, we felt like he could play on third down versus 11 personnel and also play base. So you could almost treat him like base. Where I think, if he's not down there, then we may have to truly be in a 3 linebacker base set against 12 personnel and other things, and then be able to go line, nickel, however you want to describe it, versus 11 personnel and those types of sets.
Check out BlueWhiteIllustrated.com for more detailed breakdowns on the situation. On the offensive side of the ball, 2 notable changes took place this week. The first is that tight end Khalil Dinkins, who had been slowly making his way back from a preseason injury, was back as the team's second tight end through drills on Wednesday. That's a strong indication that he'll start alongside Tyler Warren this week in the team's 3 tight end ecosystem. That moves freshman Luke Reynolds back to a primary reserve role instead of a starting one. Before fall camp, Dinkins was on track to be the team's co-starter ahead of redshirt freshman Andrew Rappleyea, who the team also lost to a long-term injury 2 weeks ago. Getting 2 of the team's 3 starting tight ends back together is critical for the long-term health of the offense. Finally, freshman wide receiver Tysier Denmark has made similar strides over the last month, moving from the developmental squad to the team's 2 deep. This week, he looked impressive in practice and was wearing his traditional number 4 jersey, meaning he's likely to suit up this weekend. That's your Penn State practice update. I'm Thomas Frank Carr from Blue White Illustrated. We'll have more of the Blaise Alexander Tailgate Show next. Wearing his traditional number 4 jersey, meaning he's likely to suit up.
The conversation regarding a lack of plays, I think, remains interesting, and it's like a subtext, right? I love subtext. I'm a big subtext guy, and for a team at this stage in the season, there are just so many offshoots of implications that are impacted by what is at this point. I mean, I pulled the stat. Penn State is 113th nationally in plays run per game. And understand there are a couple of other teams in there that are not bad company to be in. Oregon has not run a ton of plays. Georgia has not run a ton of plays at this point in the season. But what James Franklin is talking about is hey, Penn State's offense has either been feast or famine so far this season, and that famine side of things, even if it doesn't necessarily mean points, it needs to be cleaned up for a variety of reasons.
We're going to get into the other half of the conversation here in just 1 second, but I do want to ask you this as a follow-up, which is one that I think is more important than Penn State fans wanting to see stats. Julian Fleming getting catches, Liam Clifford, everyone wants to take a victory lap of I knew he wasn't, blah, blah, blah. Does it matter to the players that they're not getting catches or yards or, those stats or making meaningful plays? Because we can talk about Julian Fleming doing all the dirty work and being explosive in the sense of helping explosive plays, but does it matter that there are not as many plays to go around to the players specifically?
Yes.
It's an important thing.
It's the uncomfortable thing that all fans want to look at their team and say, oh, the culture is so strong that everyone is just in it for everyone else. It's such a team bond. It's such a good thing and a good culture. And I do think that exists at Penn State, and I am not aware of any problems. But what I can tell you is if these things fester, if one game turns into two games turns into 3, 4, 5, and some of your playmakers or the people who anticipate having an opportunity to touch the ball don't touch the ball, it's problematic. It's an issue. There's any number of ways to spin it, but I think that, again, the subtext of what James Franklin is saying is you want to have a healthy locker room that has everybody involved. Micah Shrewsbury used to call it locker room lawyering. Right. Oh, I should have gotten the ball. I should have had, so many in basketball, so many shots. Well, in football, it's so many touches, right? So many receptions, so many carries, so many targets, right? What you do with the targets is up to you. But if they're not even looking your way, or if you can't get a pass thrown in your direction, then it becomes a frustrating point.
Tailgate. Get the expert's view of today's game. Here's Landon Tangwall as he gives you the key matchups. Brought to you by Stalker Chevrolet. For your next vehicle purchase, come to Stalker Chevrolet and save with low interest rates. And remember, only at Stalker Chevrolet will you get the Stalker Advantage with the purchase of any new vehicle.
A key matchup of today for Penn State is the Penn State run game versus the Kent State front seven. And up to this point, the Kent State front seven has really struggled against the run. Against week 0 against Pitt, they let up 201. Week 1 against St. Francis, an FCS opponent, they let up 207. And then week 2 last week against Tennessee, they let up 456 yards on the ground. So there's a clear opportunity here for Penn State to really get the ground game going. And, up to this point, it's been good. They've rushed for over 200 yards in each game. But in each game, there was times where they were not able to lean on the run and really depend on that. And that's what I want to see today, where they are able to chug away 5, 6, 7 yards a carry and demoralize a defense on a drive. So that is what I want to see. I want to see Nick Singleton get going. I want to see some longer runs. And I think we're going to see a lot of Cam Wallace today. Everybody's really excited about Quentin Martin because of the spring game. But I am really excited to see Cam Wallace get going today, and someone that has really impressed people around the facility.
Yeah, he's a guy that I think is pretty underrated because he came in as a late add in the class of 2023, I think it was, from Georgia. But a guy who played a lower level of football in that state, but still, Georgia football, whatever level, it's kind of like Texas football. Pretty good. And he's a good football player. It's interesting you say that because watching this team, I actually think the defensive line is the strength of their defense. So that's not great. That's not great. That's what we're talking about here. When he's like, they're going to run for 300 yards, and I'm like, well, Cameron Olds and Lavelle Gibson, I thought those are the two best defenders overall on the Kent State defense. So it's going to be an interesting day. But yeah, I love that we're starting here because I wanted to talk about the offense and kind of the things around it when it comes to Nick Singleton and Katron Allen and Andy Kotelnicki. Now that you've seen it for 2 weeks, they had a week to do any tweaking and any improvements they want. What are your thoughts so far on the run game and how it's operated so far?
No, I like it. I think Andy Kotelnicki is getting creative in the way that he is there's only so many runs. There's power, there's counter, there's inside zone, there's outside zone. There's not, 15 different types of runs.
Yeah.
Now, what you can do off of that is create different formations, whether that's have a tight end kind of as a fullback in the backfield. And, it changes how the offensive linemen block. And there's a lot of cool stuff you can do. You've seen Andy Kotelnicki utilize pre-snap motion a lot. And what he has done is he manipulates the defense through the pre-snap motion. In the run game, he's used some orbit motion where he motions the slot wide receiver behind Drew Aller all the way around to the other side, and it will pull one of the linebackers out of the box. So when you're taking a defender out of the box, it's easier for an offensive line to block 6 guys than 7 guys because they only have 5 or 6 guys blocking majority of the time. And so that is where I think you start to see Andy Kotelnicki's influence and why the run game is starting to look a lot better than it did last year and more explosive is because he is enabling that to get his guys the ball in space. And I think Nick Singleton is someone that, coming into this year, there was a lot of questions about Nick Singleton of where did he go. And Chuck Losey said it best. He didn't go anywhere. He was asked about it because someone was asked, Nick Singleton's speed, did it go down? And they were interviewing Chuck Losey, and he said, you saw that?
I was there.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. And he's right. His speed didn't go anywhere. He always had this ability.
He got faster.
He got faster, exactly. Yeah. He didn't have the play calling. Chuck Losey can't say that all the way, but I'll finish it for him because that was the problem. Nick Singleton was not in an environment he was able to flourish. And now with Andy Kotelnicki, he is getting creative. He's getting him involved in the passing game. Both running backs have a receiving touchdown up to this point. West Virginia, Katron Allen had the really nice one, and then kicked down the door in your living room and said a couple words. So that was fun to hear on Fox. And then Nick Singleton had that really nice receiving touchdown against Bowling Green, where it almost looked like it was going to be a quarterback run because Nick Singleton kind of started to jet out to the left. They pulled Nick Dawkins as the center. And next thing, you guys are in a bad place. Josh Allen's a fraud. Sorry, no, I was kidding.
I had to derail my own show because somebody walks by in a Bills hat.
I'm sorry.
That's the only time I'm ever a fan.
I'm a diehard Steelers fan. I had to go for it.
He's making all these great points, and I saw a hat. I'm like, yeah, let's talk about the Bills fan over here. Anyway.
You guys are in a good place.
I held myself. There were 2 guys that walked by earlier, and I held myself down, but number 3 I couldn't. I want to get to one thing that you said, though, and something that I think we haven't talked enough about is that Nick Singleton is now a complete running back. The catching ability, the ball he caught for a touchdown against Bowling Green, I've watched him over the last couple of years fight the football through the air, and suddenly he's catching a seam route between 2 defenders. Like, that is not the same guy we saw a couple of years ago. That's the testament to the hard work guys put in off the field that you don't get to see, and then it shows up on game day. But I don't know if you've seen this. What has your assessment been of his vision and his ability to create outside of structure as opposed to what it was previously?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of times, and you think back to freshman year, those runs, specifically against Ohio, and he was bouncing a lot of it outside. I mean, this was inside zone duo, which means it is an A-gap run.
Yep.
And he was just faster than everybody. And he said, I'm going to take it to the outside and go for a touchdown. He did it a couple times. But now he is really starting to follow where he's supposed to go. I mean, that is how it's being blocked up. And he is starting to see the field a little bit better. So it's fun to watch that because now he's breaking off these 40, 50-yard runs again. And I think we're going to continue to see that more and more. And he's really trusting his keys. And some of the biggest things you have to do as a running back is you have to press the line of scrimmage, meaning that you get up into the hole before you make your cut. Because what that does, it sucks the linebackers in. If you suck them in a little bit and then you make a jump to another hole, then there is not as many people there to tackle you. I mean,
it makes your job easier, right?
Exactly. As an offensive lineman, it does. It brings the linebackers closer to us, to those double teams, and you are able to be a little more efficient there. So, I just overall, Andy Kotelnicki's scheme is allowing these offensive players to play inspired, having fun, and confident, and you can't underestimate that when you are playing for an offense that you don't really have confidence, or a defense where you don't have confidence in your play calling. You are not going to thrive as an offense or defense. So I think we are seeing that from Andy Kotelnicki, and it is refreshing because I don't really think we've seen it since Joe Moorhead for the most part, where we are having fun with an explosive offense. Now, I'll pump the brakes a little bit. We have played 2 really bad defensive teams, as a whole. I mean, West Virginia was not very good, and Bowling Green is still a MAC team. We're going to play a lot better defenses next week, for one. But up to this point, I just think the scheme that Andy Kotelnicki has put on tape has impressed me in a way that it makes it harder for the defense, and that's the biggest thing. And the offense also looks different. It's new. It's unique. I didn't feel like there was as big of a change from Soraka over to Jursic. Now the offense just looks different.
Yeah, and I think that's when you're watching these games through the first 2 weeks, I see things that translate going forward in terms of if you're doing these things correctly and you're doing them well, that's what you're looking for against those teams. And they produce the dynamic results you get, but later on, maybe a 40-yard run turns into a 10-yard run. That's still a 10-yard run. That is still extending another drive and getting you through more plays.
Can we talk? We were talking about Nick Singleton, and we missed talking about the fact that he is averaging 9 yards per carry right now.
Yeah.
I mean, he's taking over, and
Yeah.
I'm here for it. It feels like it's 2022 again, where Nick Singleton was breaking off a run every other week, and we're only headed into our third game, but I think he's going to continue that today. I gave you the stats earlier about how abysmal Kent State's run defense really is, letting up 456 yards on the ground to Tennessee last week. There is an opportunity for this ground game to get established, and Nick Singleton to break off one of those 70-yard runs that we saw him do a lot his freshman year.
I actually wanted you're the stat guy here, believe it or not. I have a stat for you. On runs of 15 or more yards, last year, Nick Singleton, 169 yards through the entire season. This year in 2 games, 177. He has already eclipsed what he had last year in big-time runs because of everything you just talked about, from the scheme to his development to the confidence. It's all coming together. One thing, though, that isn't. The tight end room has been injured, and it's gone talked about, truthfully, because of the KJ Winston injury and the level of player and the profile that he had as a guy that we all thought was an NFL draft pick and potentially an All-American this year. Andrew Rappelier also lost for a long-term injury, maybe for the season, depending on how you want to be loose with James Franklin's actual words. But Khalil Dinkins, we're expecting the BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, our reporting is we expect him to be back, if not full go, mostly full go this week. How important is it to get a guy who you expected preseason to be one of your 3 top tight ends, potentially a starter? How important is it to get that guy back so that you can start to integrate him into the offense and do maybe more or different things now that you potentially have 2 tight ends again, where you lost that in the second week of the season?
Yeah, it's really important. And, as you say, I love my facts. And shout out, I got this fact from T-Frank. I asked him for it last year. It's a different offense this year, but last year we ran a 2 tight end set over 50% of the time. We ran a 3 tight end set like 5% of the time. We're able to start to utilize our offensive player. I mean, our tight ends, when we're deep there, you've seen when we had Tyler Warren, Brenton Strange, and Theo Johnson, we had them all on the field a decent amount of the time, considering. And when you have the versatility of an offense where also Luke Reynolds is I see him becoming an elite receiver, it starts to get exciting with those opportunities. But if you really only have 2 guys, let's say when Khalil was out with Tyler Warren and Luke Reynolds, and you're kind of handicapped a little bit, it's harder. But you add Khalil Dinkins back in the mix, someone who you think can block and receive really well, had 2 receiving touchdowns last year. You're like, okay, as Andy Koroniki, I can start to open the playbook up just a little bit more where I feel confident and maybe getting into a 3 tight end set on the field where, like I said, Penn State has really liked to live in the past just because that tight end room was so deep, not only receiving, but really blocking. And that's, when you got an offensive lineman as a coach, Ty Howell played center here. And we would watch his tape sometimes, and he would, he'd like to come in, and he ran outside zone really well. If you think like Hunter Norzad was really reaching that 3, those G's and stuff really well, watch some Ty Howell tape. He was really good in run blocking. And so he puts that into the tight ends. And I got the opportunity to talk to Tyler Warren last Monday, 2 Mondays ago after his game. And he basically said, I asked him, I said, how do you change your mindset from being a wide receiver, but also kind of being an offensive lineman? I mean, that's what being a tight end is. And he said, honestly, we just take the mindset of being an offensive lineman out to be a wide receiver. And it's like, that's why you see Tyler. That's why you see Tyler Warren dominate and physically impose as well, even in the passing game. I mean, him receive, catch something and put his shoulder down into someone, and it's fun to watch. And I think that comes from Ty Howell and kind of the mentality he brings. And no one does it better than offensive linemen, T. Frank. So somehow my points always come back to offensive linemen running the ball, that type of thing.
So let's talk about quarterbacks now. I do want to talk about the offensive line, but we've got so many things to get to, and with the run game and the way they've been playing, I think we kind of covered how explosive that unit has been and how it's been able to create some of those big plays for Nick Singleton. On the flip side, I guess my assessment is they've been a little leaky in pass protection, but Drew Aller has been overcoming some of that and making good plays with the ball in his hands. Is that your assessment? And generally, how do you think Drew's been playing so far this year?
Yeah, he looks comfortable, he looks confident, and he looks like he's having fun. And I think that's the big difference. You look at the stats in week 2 this year to last year, they probably look pretty similar. He's sitting, I think, 5 touchdowns, 450, and 1 interception, I believe. But, it looks different. The stats look the same, but he looks different on the field. He's having fun. He's confident. He's slinging the ball. There's a couple passes that it's like, okay, he wasn't really making those passes last year, or he's even attempting to make those passes. And I think he's feeling a little bit of confidence. If you look back to the West Virginia game, even a moment where Trey Wallace was covered, and this was a little bit into the game after I think their first touchdown, he felt some confidence, and he just threw it up to Trey Wallace, and Trey Wallace didn't catch it, but he drew a defensive pass interference. So that is where you start to see Drew Aller take that next step mentally. I think then also we talked about using his legs a little bit when stuff breaks down. I want to say he's extended, I think, at least 4 drives on the season on third down rushing for the first down.
Yeah.
And part of that is because he dropped 7 to 8 pounds in the offseason. He got a little bit weight off of him and worked with Chuck Losey, got a little bit faster. And, that is something that is important to have when it's 3rd and 5. If you're able to have a run threat at quarterback, that's really nice because you think, like, when we played Ohio State for the past 10 years, pre-Kyle McCord era, Ohio State had an elite quarterback, but those quarterbacks could also always at least run for a little bit. You were thinking about them on 3rd and 4, 3rd and 5 if they're going to pass it.
Yeah.
So, if we not necessarily saying Drew Aller is necessarily a running quarterback, but, you could start to pose a threat there and have the defensive coordinator worried about that. That is something that's really good, and I think that's what Drew Aller has shown up to this point. And he's a big boy. Like, that's hard to tackle. Like 6'5", like 230? That's pretty large, so I wouldn't want to tackle him necessarily. So I think he continues to use his. Well,
I think you do want to try that.
Maybe it's I was always his protector. So
right. I think it's just baked into you not to want to do that. You say it looks different. I want to give you a stat to get out of here of how different it is. Yards per attempt. That is okay. He throws the football. How many yards did he gain per attempt? Last year, sure, he completed 90% of his passes in certain games, but his yards per attempt was 6.7 yards. This year, 11.4. Nearly double. Every single time he throws the football, it's going for a first down. That's pretty dang good. And you talk about how far he's throwing the ball down the field. Again, last year, talk about average depth of target of 8 yards. Now, a first down and 2 yards. He's throwing it 12 yards down the field on average. This is an aggressive offense, taking advantage of a guy who's got a gigantic arm, a lightning-fast release, and can read a defense. So we're going to talk more about the offense, and we're going to talk more about what James Franklin had to say this week in the Coach's Corner. That's coming up next year. We'll be right back on the Penn State Tailgate Show, driven by Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships on 99.5 and 107.5 The Bus, Bigfoot Country Legends, and streaming on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel.
Press conferences are boring, right? Press conferences are boring, right?
That's why we've set aside the most important stuff for you.
It's Coach's Corner, powered by Your Cigar Den and Monte Cristo Lounge, with free, easy in and out parking for all your tailgating needs. Check out Your Cigar Den's new Casa Cuba Lounge on Colonnade Boulevard next to Wegmans.
Back for the MAC. Penn State is getting set for their second straight game of MACtion as Kent State Golden Flashes are on their way into Happy Valley. But the Nittany Lions had their first of 2 bye weeks on the season ahead of time. It was not a complete rest period for the team, however. Head coach James Franklin had seen how the Nittany Lions had played over the past 2 weeks and saw a glaring cleanup job at hand: penalties. The Nittany Lions accounted for 15 penalties and 137 yards in total through 2 weeks of the season. Coach Franklin sees penalties as a major issue and had a week off to focus on them.
We're giving yards away and making things more challenging. So that is a major priority for us. I think we've talked about this in the past. If you look statistically at where penalties rank in terms of winning and losing, it's nowhere near what the turnover ratio is and what explosive plays are. but it makes for a sloppy game.
Penn State's defense had a rough go of it 2 weeks ago against Bowling Green, giving up 27 points to the Falcons. But the bigger loss on the day came in the secondary with star safety KJ Winston. Number 2 in Penn State's defense has been ruled out with, as Franklin puts it, a long-term injury. With no timetable for his return, defensive coordinator Tom Allen has to look elsewhere for production in the secondary, and fans want to know who will be the next man up.
Day Lane is the next guy that we've been trying to get reps for. Obviously, when you're talking about Jay Reed and Zachy, those two guys have played a ton of football for us and will need to continue. Day's another guy that we've been trying to get more reps and more experience. That'll be important, but we're going to have to develop a few more guys, especially hopefully. We'll see timing wise how this whole thing will play out, but definitely for short term we're gonna have to develop some more guys.
The double bye week was a reprieve for the blue and white, with the team being able to stay in Happy Valley for the week. Teams around the nation notched their third game under their belts already, on the way to possibly the longest collegiate football season some teams have ever seen. James was asked about the impending expansive schedule his crew could see in the winter months, and he did not hold back on his feelings.
It's interesting because whenever anybody wants to get anything done in college football, we say we're doing it for health and wellness, to get things passed, rule changes and things like that. But it's hard to say that when we're talking about a regular season as you described it, plus 5 more games, possible 17-game season, depending on how it plays out, for the teams that make the national championships.
One of the teams to play its third game so far this season, Notre Dame. The Fighting Irish lost to Northern Illinois in South Bend in a stunning 16-14 upset. What conference is Northern Illinois in, you ask? The MAC. And Penn State plays its second MAC opponent on the season with Kent State this week, and Bowling Green was the first. Franklin feels strongly about what his team needs to do before another bout of Maction hits Happy Valley.
But the challenge is really, it's ultimately about us and our focus on Penn State and us getting better and developing and playing up to our standard week in and week out, which is easier said than done. We see it every Saturday. That's why I always say winning is hard. There's a lot of teams across the country that are sad Saturday night, and you want to do everything you possibly can to make sure you're not one of them.
That was your Penn State Coach's Corner. More from the Tailgate Show in a moment.
Located at 7 Pleasant View Boulevard, it's the new title and tag service in.
We made this mistake last week, but we're going to do it again. Poncho 570 says top 5 players you're hoping to see play this weekend. Let's do this as part 2. So, Fitz, what are the top 5 players you're hoping to see play this weekend that we have not seen yet?
Much better chance of it happening this weekend. Kent State. Oh boy, that's a tough one, man. You're looking at a 71-0 loss to Tennessee last weekend, and actually that kind of puts pressure on Penn State because Tennessee and Penn State very close in the rankings right now. So like Penn State's going to be incentivized to run it up as well, and Kent State nowhere near Bowling Green's capabilities. As I said that, we definitely underestimated Bowling Green, even though we said they're a good MAC team. We did not realize what that meant. And that was pretty bad on us. Going back to the actual question at hand, we go back to Ethan Grunkmeyer, Quentin Martin. Those two guys are guys that I hope to see. I think we're going to see a lot of Cam Wallace, or maybe more of Cam Wallace sprinkled in the first half with those other running backs. But does it get to Quentin Martin? This is one of those games where you've got a 4-game red shirt planned. I think you're going to see those guys. So Quentin Martin's an interesting one. Tyseer Denmark as well on the offensive side of the ball. So those guys are the ones that I'm really looking at, and hopefully, fingers crossed here, you get to see them maybe in the third quarter and get a decent amount of reps, because those are valuable reps. Those are whether you're watching the game at that point or not. And I know we've got some guys that chart every snap all the way up to the kneel down in the fourth quarter, and all glory to you guys. But yeah. Right. It's those are very important snaps for them to get an idea of the surroundings, get an idea. Catching a pass in Beaver Stadium is different than catching a ball in Holuba Hall. It's different than catching a ball at Lash. It's different than catching it on the high school field. So Excuse me. So those are 3 guys that I think are obvious in terms of looking at what we want to see this weekend. Grunkmeyer was questionable for Bowling Green. I did not note if he was at practice. I wasn't in practice last week, so hopefully he's healthy enough to do so. He was there, so hopefully he's good enough to do so, and maybe see some fireworks from those younger guys.
Nate, who are the players you're interested in watching this week? I'm going to put some up on from the chat, but who do you want to see? What are the top 5 players for you?
I think Dakari Nelson stands out as a position of need to get up to speed very quickly. So he definitely stands out to me. I think that it wouldn't hurt to continue to try to speed up Javen Williams' progression, right? To have a 4th tackle that's ready to go and contribute. I just like Tyler Holsworth, so if they got that far, I'd be cool with that. And then certainly I think
Dealerships Tailgate Show, celebrating more than 40 years of service to the community. Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships has a vehicle to fit your budget and transportation needs. Home of the $1,000 lowest price guarantee with 20 locations throughout Pennsylvania. I'm Thomas Frankar. That is Landon Tangwall, former Penn State offensive lineman, and of the Behind the Wall podcast on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel, you probably already know that because we have a lot of people that watch both of our shows who have been so nice that have stopped by and said hello here at the Tailgate Show. We're outside the Bryce Jordan Center ticket office, right in front of the King's Hawaiian soft pretzel bites, if you want to say hi.
They're good. I had some. I liked it.
Landon is enjoying those here for both of us today. You want to talk about the receivers? We're talk about the defense this segment. You're gonna talk. You have a point that we didn't get to though on the offense about the receivers.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk about this. We got 25 completions on the year between all the wide receivers, and 25 completions as an offense. Only 10 have gone to the wide receivers. So I posed this question on Twitter, and the big response was, "Hey, that's okay if we're spreading the ball around to the tight ends, getting the running backs involved in the passing game. That's cool with me." And I agree. I think being able to be creative, getting Nick Singleton and Katron Allen involved, and obviously Tyler Warren had a record-setting day against Bowling Green. But I want to pose this question to you, T. Frank. Do you start to worry if you don't have a true number 1 wide receiver that's notching over 1,000 yards? Does that hurt you in recruiting? Because you have to see your position do something decent for you to want to go somewhere. I'm going to be honest, which it's funny for me to say because we were really bad at offensive line.
You were like the one that started the trend of hey, you can go to Penn State and play offensive line.
Okay, there's very few people that want to go somewhere and change something.
Right.
I think it's been changed, so I guess I get to take a little bit of credit for that. But because this offensive line it's in a different place now.
Yeah.
As a whole.
No, you're absolutely
really,
right. You're
the wide receivers.
Right. So that's been a huge problem probably since 2018. 2019, I know Jahan Dotson had a great year in 2020, but the pandemic year and all those things, I think that there's a fair criticism of this particular institution when it comes to receivers, but it's not like they have been devoid of talent. You look all the way back to, and the crazy thing is, and how old I'm getting, is Chris Godwin. How long ago he went to the draft? In
2016? 16, 15?
Yeah,
16, yeah.
Yeah, the 2016 was his last year at Penn State, and a guy never crested 1,000 yards in a season.
Well, here's the thing. You listen to me. Once again, I love my stats. Going back 10 years, we've only had 2 seasons with a 1,000-yard receiver. It was 2015 with Godwin, and then 21 with Jahan Dotson. So, there hasn't been an elite true wide receiver here in a long time that was dominant.
Yeah.
And I just want to share the story real quick. If you have been following for a while, you remember Dante Thornton in 2021, went to Oregon. He was in my class, now at Tennessee, and he was committed here originally for a while. And then he decommitted, and I asked him, I said, why? Come on, we're building something cool here. And he said, I haven't seen the ability for a number 1 wide receiver to really emerge at Penn State and be elite and just be fed the ball.
Yeah.
So I'm not going there. And I was like, honestly, I can't really even argue that. So as much as I just wanted to bring that up of, people are saying it's fine, don't get the wide receivers involved. But you look around, and any team that's won the national championship as of recent, well, maybe that's a bad idea. Maybe not. I mean, Michigan was not the rule. I mean, they're the exception to the rule.
Yeah.
You normally have an elite wide receiver number 1. And Roman Wilson was pretty good. He's actually getting started in the NFL this week with the Steelers. He's been injured. But Roman Wilson was a really good wide receiver for J.J. McCarthy. Every team that wins has a pretty elite wide receiver. And so I think you need to have that formula if you're Penn State. And I think it can be Trey Wallace.
Yeah.
But he just got to see the targets and continue to build that rapport with Drew Aller.
Yeah. I do think the opportunity is there in this offense to be fun and awesome. So it's not just about the number of yards. And it's not just the number of targets. It's the quality of those targets. And if you are feeling like you're a bad MFer on the field and you get to show that, I mean, Trey, again, talking about the explosive nature of this offense, Trey Wallace has 5 catches for 117 yards. He averages 23 yards a catch. So when he gets the ball, and he would have had a 58-yard touchdown, I think, or 54-yard touchdown last week, there are some things in this offense, Amari Evans, some of the deep passes that aren't being completed right now, but are reasonable to say they could have made those plays. So there is.
They're chucking it down the field, you know. I have to take it every time I get the opportunity. I'm sorry.
I mean, it's not like they're throwing over top of a deep safety who's just standing there being like, "Hey, throw it here." Like that's the optimism this season, because you're right, they do have to follow through on that, and Trey Wallace has to be the guy, and Amari Evans has to continue being explosive against the best of the best on your schedule. That has to happen, but the ingredients are there this year, I think, to change that narrative, and there has been some of that in recruiting too, where I think that after a first season of kind of getting his legs underneath him, from August to September, the difference in the quality of recruits that Penn State got in the class of 25, and I know it's 26, but a ways away, they have been getting some quality guys. They've been turning that narrative around, but it just takes one guy. I think that you bring up a great point. It just takes one guy. It'd been a while. Penn State had always had quality running backs. They'd always been good at running back. Saquon Barkley set a superstar standard. If you want to be a star running back in the NFL, go to Penn State. There has not been a guy, you want to be a star receiver, you want to be a star quarterback, that is the final level. That's the final boss in recruiting. That's the final boss in program development. And they have the ingredients to do it this year, but they do absolutely have to follow through on that. How much, I guess this is the thing too, because I look at this and I look at the quality of the play, how well the team is operating overall. I don't necessarily even look at box score stats all that much. How much do you, and you I mean a recruit or a football player, look at the box score and see your numbers, your name?
You don't really. It's more, you just see it on Twitter and you see what the fans are saying, which more than half the time is probably wrong. But
it's a bad faith, and half the time it's a bad faith argument. It's somebody who's looking for a reason to make a point.
Exactly. So, I do think there's a piece of it. If we want to talk about, like, stat sheet, and we're talking about from a recruit standpoint, but I also think from, a player standpoint, we have some things where it gets demoralizing. For example, like Nick Singleton last year, if you're not breaking that 100-yard mark, it starts to kind of get you, and people talk about it. Now, you kind of look at the team this year, the defensive line is really struggling. They're not producing in the sack category. Now, that's not necessarily to their own fault, because Bowling Green and Coach Franklin said this. They came out, and their plan was, we're getting the ball out really quickly. We're not going to allow this Penn State defensive line to affect our passing game and our quarterback. And they came with a great plan and executed well. And kind of the same thing with West Virginia. But also, when West Virginia held the ball, Abdul and Denai and company, Tony Rojas, they disrupted the quarterback. They just didn't get the sack.
They didn't finish the play.
They didn't finish the play. And honestly, sometimes most coaches say, hey, I'm more interested in pressures and QB hits than sacks. That is, you start to make a quarterback fear you, that he's going to constantly be in his grill all night long. Yeah. That is more important than maybe just getting one sack.
And what happened in the fourth quarter, they got 2 interceptions. One of the things I've noticed about this, I went in and I did an analysis of the pressure, the defensive line, the defensive structure, and some of the differences in this defense versus what we saw previously under Manny Diaz. And that's a perfect transition to talk about that, the lack of sacks, the lack of pressure. The defensive line overall, and the defense overall, is winning, beating blocks at the same rate as last year. But the quality of the pressure and the quickness of the pressure is vastly different because of the defensive architecture. When you're an offensive lineman and you got linebackers mugging the A gap or mugging the B gap, and that means a guy directly in your face, for those that don't know, somebody standing up in a pass rushing stance from a linebacker position. What does that do to you as an offensive lineman when you've got all of those gaps filled with aggressive attacking nature defense?
Yeah, well, it's a couple things. So in pass pro, it makes it very confusing. And it's one thing that Penn State does very well on defense is they run that 7-up look. And a lot of times you only bring 3-4 guys, but the way you do it is very strategic. And if you watch closely, sometimes, when Abdul did it last year, but Tony Rojas, when they're lined up in that A-gap in a linebacker position, they come for 1 second and then they drop. And what that does is the lineman will commit, and now the lineman says, oh, crap, I got to bail out and get to this other guy. And that's when it starts. Then they're running a pick. They're running a game.
You give somebody like Abdul Carter one step, he's going to get through.
He's getting home. So, that is where that defense starts to put the offense at a disadvantage. And, you scheme that up. And if you're playing against an offensive line here at Kent State that is not very good, that's why you want to get into those 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, just 3rd and longs as a whole, because it starts to create basically the offense gets a little scared. They don't have time to sit back there and deliver a pass for 4 or 5 seconds. They don't have the receivers to run routes and get open. They just don't. So they need to stay ahead of the sticks. The key to success for Penn State today is making sure that you put Kent State in a bad position in 3rd and longs. That's how you start to create those turnovers, and it turns into those 50, 60-point wins for Penn State.
Just a little bit of under the hood here about the Kent State offense. Despite being down 60 points at halftime, and despite having a struggling season so far, being down in all of these games, the starting quarterback's average time to throw is 2.35 seconds, which 2.5 is par. That means you're throwing the ball out on time. He's throwing the ball out on early on every down when they're down by 21 points. So they refuse to give up pressures and sacks. They just refuse to do it. And you see it reflected in 3rd and 19 and a 3 and out and a punt. So today might not be the day where we see that change over, but at the same time, I think, to your point, those pressures have to show up. You have to leave this game feeling, man, Dennis Sutton dominated that game. Abdul Carter dominated his opponent, as opposed to where were they? And if you're looking at stats and going, where were they, then this is more of a vibe check here.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, but you look back to last year and you think against UMass, Adese Isaac had 2.5 sacks. Chop Robinson against Rutgers was really strip sack. There was a lot of games. Deny ended the game against Indiana last year. So there was a lot of times where it felt like the defensive line was taking over a game, and we just haven't felt that up to this point. But like, well, what much and they were very highly rated guys, and then it's okay, we're just going to reload with Denai Dennis Sutton and Abdul Carter, and then up to this point when you're just looking at the stat sheet last year from the defensive line, but when you're constantly playing offensive schemes it's their goal to get the ball out, and like you said, under 2.5 seconds, it's hard to get to the quarterback in under 2.5 seconds. I mean, that means you have to beat the offensive lineman quick off the ball, clean. So you're right.
But to that point, that was what Manny Diaz's defense did. Not only did it create pressure by the design of it from those 7-up looks, which they've done, but they've done less of them this year. They've done more blitzing from depth. They've done more just straight up 5-man pressures, less of those zone pressures, less of those. I don't want to say they're less creative, but they're less designed pressures. It creates less one-on-ones, right? So suddenly you have a slot corner, Johnny Dixon blitzing off the edge, and the running back has to take him. Now you can beat that guy one-on-one. There's just been fewer of those opportunities, so there have been fewer of those wins for Abdul Carter. It's been a harder task despite a similar approach. So I'm curious as to, without KJ Winston, because a lot of this has been coverage focused from the back end, because if you're doing less up front, you could do more in the back. Without KJ Winston, how does all of this change? Do they emphasize the pass rush more? Do they change some of the things they want to do from that perspective? I'm curious about that. One thing I'm curious about, if from your perspective, when it comes to the line position, what we started talking the show about, not being able to play Jalen Reed at that field linebacker position, at that hybrid role, how do you feel about playing base defense with 3 linebackers and then having kind of a more split defensive approach with a nickel and a base defense?
Yeah, I mean, you have to do with what you have. I mean, I think that's obviously what Tom Allen's saying when he's looking at the guys I have. But I mean, it hurts. It definitely limits you with what, like you said, your creative ability. If you're Tom Allen, I can no longer get really creative on the back end. If you have, as much as we've talked about, Dejon Lane is going to be a really good player, but when you have a freshman, they mess things up. they MA, meaning they have missed assignments the most. And so, you can't trust him as much to run that back end and be exactly where he's supposed to be as much as you can trust a guy like KJ Winston. And that's also just because of KJ's instincts as a player. I think he's got some of the best instincts I've ever seen, and that's a testament to what he does off the field and in the film room. But, I think we're going to see more, like you said, traditional 4-3 defense. And it kind of sucks. I'm going to be honest. I think up to this point, the linebackers haven't really played very well, if we're just going to be honest, so far this year. And that wasn't really the expectation coming into this year with at least, the guys we had at the one tier. And then there was kind of always a concern about the depth at linebacker, but it's just no one has really stepped up a ton at linebacker. We saw Tony Rojas. That was a huge pick 2 weeks ago against Bowling Green to kind of turn the tide. But at the same time, I just want to see a little bit more from our linebackers being able to come downhill, not allow these sustained drives by the other offenses, and continue to kind of chug away at the defense with some runs. But I think we are going to be in a more base defense, and we're going to be a lot more limited than we thought with what Tom Allen can do with those guys on the back end. And I think we have to rely on the pass rushers a little bit. I guarantee there's a little bit extra weight on Denai Dennis Sutton and Abdul Carter's shoulders, thinking, okay, this is on us now. We have to make up for what is now lacking on the back end of the defense. That means create just a little bit more pressure, and a play that KJ Winston might have made, maybe Dejon Lane isn't going to make necessarily. Right. But if we apply a little pressure, well, maybe now Dejon Lane can make that play.
So it's a lot easier to catch a pop fly than it is to catch a line drive. So if you're looking for something easier for a freshman to build his confidence, that might be a way to go. A way to go that we're going next is there was a big game last night in the Big Ten that directly impacts Penn State's next game at Beaver Stadium. We're going to be talking around the Big Ten coming up next, but in your immediate future, it is This Week in Penn State Sports, brought to you by Bobby Rahal Lexus in Lewistown. This is the Penn State Tailgate Show, driven by Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships on 99.5 and 107.5 The Bus, Bigfoot Country Legends, streaming on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel, and a partridge and a pear tree.
It's more than just football at Penn State. Here's This Week in Penn State Sports, brought to you by Bobby Rahal Lexus in Lewistown. Get ready to experience luxury like never before at Bobby Rahal Lexus of Lewistown. We are Nittany Valley's award-winning Lexus dealership at 425 Electric Avenue. Visit us on the web at BobbyRahalLexusofLewistown.com.
Penn State teams across the board have had a bit of a rough week, except for one. Penn State women's soccer continued their finding of form with a 1-0 defeat over the Northwestern Wildcats at Jeffrey Field Thursday night. Women's soccer has now not lost a match for an entire month. Last time they lost was on August 22nd against Virginia. Head coach Erica Dombach's crew has itself a test coming into Happy Valley on Sunday, however. 5th-ranked Michigan State makes its way to Jeffrey Field for a big top 10 matchup for the Nittany Lions. First kick is scheduled for 2 p.m. here in State College. Their seasons have yet to begin, like women's soccer, but the energy and excitement for some Penn State men's basketball and Lady Lion action has ratcheted up big time. Both teams begin their campaigns on November 4th in the Bryce Jordan Center with a basketball doubleheader. The men's crew against Binghamton, the Lady Lions against Bucknell. The biggest change, though, comes in the new-look Big Ten. Mike Rhodes and co. start their conference play with the Zach Edey-less Purdue Boilermakers coming to the Bryce Jordan Center on December 5th. They head on the road to Piscataway a week later to take on the high-energy new-look Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Oregon is the first squad to make its way east into the BJC for the first time on January 12th, while Washington comes in on February 15th. Penn State heads out west for a California road trip on February 8th against USC and the 11th against UCLA. Carolyn Keeger's squad, meanwhile, welcomes the Ducks into Happy Valley 4 days prior to the men's team on.
It's more than just football at Penn State. Here's This Week in Penn State Sports, brought to you by Bobby Rahal Lexus in Lewistown. Get ready to experience luxury like never before at Bobby Rahal Lexus of Lewistown. We are Nittany Valley's award-winning Lexus dealership at 425 Electric Avenue. Visit us on the web at BobbyRahalLexusofLewistown.com.
Penn State teams across the board have had a bit of a rough week, except for one. Penn State women's soccer continued their finding of form with a 1-0 defeat over the Northwestern Wildcats at Jeffrey Field Thursday night. Women's soccer has now not lost a match for an entire month. Last time they lost was on August 22nd against Virginia. Head coach Erica Dombach's crew has itself a test coming into Happy Valley on Sunday, however. 5th-ranked Michigan State makes its way to Jeffrey Field for a big top 10 matchup for the Nittany Lions. First kick is scheduled for 2 p.m. here in State College. Their seasons have yet to begin, like women's soccer, but the energy and excitement for some Penn State men's basketball and Lady Lion action has ratcheted up big time. Both teams begin their campaigns on November 4th in the Bryce Jordan Center with a basketball doubleheader. The men's crew against Binghamton, the Lady Lions against Bucknell. The biggest change, though, comes in the new-look Big Ten. Mike Rhodes and co. start their conference play with the Zach Edey-less Purdue Boilermakers coming to the Bryce Jordan Center on December 5th. They head on the road to Piscataway a week later to take on the high-energy new-look Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Oregon is the first squad to make its way east into the BJC for the first time on January 12th, while Washington comes in on February 15th. Penn State heads out west for a California road trip on February 8th against USC and the 11th against UCLA. Carolyn Keeger's squad, meanwhile, welcomes the Ducks into Happy Valley 4 days prior to the men's team on January 8th. Right after the West comes the East, the team heads out west. The Lady Lions make their own voyage to LA on January 12th and Pasadena on the 15th. They welcome in the Washington Huskies on February 5th to round out their matchups against the newcomers to Big Ten basketball country. That was This Week in Penn State Sports. Back to the Tailgate Show in a moment.
Next thing is Fitz wrote something that I thought was super interesting, and I know it received a lot of attention over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Really well read. Is 5 Penn State commits making a statement in September. Go check out that article because we're only going to talk about a couple of them. But I'm mostly interested in your opinion of LeVar Arrington II, who was a guy that we all went, yeah, why not? When he got his 2024 film out, or excuse me, 23 film. Now feels like there's a little more evidence about what he is and isn't as a football player. Fitz.
There's a lot more film now. They're putting it out every week, unlike last year where it was.
There's more film in like one game than there was for his entire junior year. And I don't know if that's a product of the way they do things out there or if he just didn't have as many highlights, but he's got highlights this year. He looks pretty good. And he's playing more of a stand-up defensive end role. We're listing him still as an athlete / linebacker, but you put on this tape, and I know he's got good measurements. He's so lanky that he might not be as long as you think, just based on the way that he's built. But like he looks like a guy that can play defensive end and a guy that's got some twitch as a hand in the dirt type guy. So really excited. I think the thing that I keep going back to is you watch some of these clips and his change of direction is terrific. Like I did not expect him to put some of the moves that he'd put on and then to.
We're taking a look around the Big Ten here on the Penn State Football Tailgate Show. Illinois defeats Nebraska 31-24 in overtime last night in Nebraska. So that team devastated. They thought they were going to be heading undefeated into their game against Ohio State. But that means Illinois, you said this to me, I think, on Monday. You're like, this is going to be a top 20 matchup when Illinois comes to Beaver Stadium next week. So let's start with that game. What did you see from Penn State's next opponent? What did you see from Illinois during that game?
Yeah, they looked like a well-coached team. It was, watching it the entire time, it was like the first drive. I mean, they marched down. And then Nebraska, I mean, they're a good team. And Dylan Raiola is a good player. He's not Patrick Mahomes, but he's a good player. And
don't tell him that.
Well, yeah, he wants to be him. And I think Mahomes likes it. It definitely feeds that ego a little bit of Mahomes. Yeah. I mean, one of the best young quarterbacks in college football wants to be like you.
Yeah.
I don't care how good you are, even if you're the best quarterback in the NFL. That feels good.
Yeah.
Put that aside. I just overall, they impressed me. Their offense, their creativity. We saw them go back to a lot of things that continued to work. They were just putting tight ends in a boot into the flat. And, I mean, they were getting a lot of first downs. We saw the play where I think they had one had been wide receivers, but they kind of snuck him at the fullback position on one of those last touchdowns out of the backfield.
Yeah.
He was wide open in the flat for a touchdown. There was just a lot of things where Illinois looked creative. They have a 6'3", 250-pound running back. The quarterback started to look a little bit more comfortable. Now, we put him under some duress last year and had a couple interceptions, but hopefully we can kind of recreate that. But like I said, this is going to be a top 20 matchup. in Beaver Stadium next week, and it's going to be nighttime. I'm excited. I tweeted this out. I'm a little bit. Check me out on Twitter at Landon Tangwall. Constantly tweeting. T. Frank said something about that to me the other day. If you want to keep up on Penn State football, follow me. I'm
anything at all.
Yeah, or anything. Yeah, pretty much.
Anything football, Landon's got you covered.
You know, if you want to be ready for the tailgates, holla at me for some stats. So, I'm completely knocked me off, T. Frank. I don't even know where we're at.
We're talking about Illinois. We're talking about
Illinois. Dude, it was
something you
fun.
said on Twitter.
But I mean, the biggest thing is they clearly have some good leadership. I mean, we went into overtime, and you kind of felt the momentum had then changed to Illinois, and it was like, okay, and they come out. They have the big running back I was talking about, 6'3", 250, goes down to the 4-yard line, and then they score a touchdown with ease, and it was like, oh, okay, Nebraska comes out. It's like, all right, let's see if this kid has any Mahomes-like traits, and they go backwards like 25 yards to end the game, and they end on a sack. And it was like, okay, maybe this – and I felt it right away. I was like, this is the test for Illinois. They're going into Lincoln, Nebraska, and playing a good Nebraska team led by Matt Rule. And it was like, oh, they didn't flinch at all, and they're well coached. And it's like, okay, this is – I felt like after the first quarter, I was like, yeah, this is going to be a fight next week in Beaver Stadium.
You have to beat that team. They're not going to beat themselves with some mistakes. Now, I'll say – they have Luke Altmaier has improved. He is a very good quarterback. There were times in that game where Nebraska gave one look pre-snap, and then post-snap they gave him a different look, and suddenly he did not know what to do with the football, and that was very reminiscent of the guy he was last year when Penn State played Illinois out in Champaign. So if Penn State plays the defense they've been playing in terms of the schematic, we're going to play press man coverage, we're going to beat you because we're better athletes, I think it's a game at that point. But if Penn State decides they're going to throw more mixed looks at him, be a little bit more sneaky in terms of what they're trying to do with that defensive rotation in the secondary, I think that could help out. But if you've got a freshman back there, if you're relying on Dejon Lane, or if you have to play with a certain defense where you are giving the other team an advantage, where you don't have a guy like Jalen Reed, and maybe that's now a cornerback, or maybe now that's Dom DeLuca, and there's a 3-receiver set. There's some vulnerabilities now where there weren't before in this defense from that perspective, but I think that it is a good test for Penn State. I'm interested what you thought of their defensive line, Illinois' defensive line. No Johnny Newton, but I think they return a strong unit. Do you think that's a good test for Penn State and their offensive line?
Yeah, I think it's going to be the toughest test up to this point of the season, and I'm excited to see how they handle it. I think, like you said, they lost Newton to the draft last year, but this is still an Illinois defensive line that I think is going to cause some problems. They execute their stunts in their games that they run really well, meaning that you normally have one defensive lineman coming to pick an offensive lineman, and the other guy loops around. They just do a really good job setting that up for their guys. And they get home. They got home a couple times on Dylan Raiola, who is someone who is very mobile. I wouldn't necessarily call him a running quarterback. He's a lot like Patrick Mahomes in the sense he's not a running quarterback, but he creates space and gives himself some really good passing lanes. And he wasn't able to do that a lot of times against this Illinois front seven and defensive line. So they're going to pose a challenge, and I'm excited. I mean, they got after us last year. And, I mean, obviously Newton was a big part of that. Yeah. But they are a good team, and that defense is solid. So I am curious to see. I mean, this is going to be the first real test for the Penn State offense. We talk about rushing for 200 yards in every game up to this point, and Drew Aller has looked comfortable. Well, next week is going to be that true test because you're playing a real defense, not West Virginia or Bowling Green. Those are some defenses that are quite lackluster.
Ohio State beat Marshall. I don't know where they are in the game. I don't know what the score is, but I know that Ohio State beat Marshall today. That one kicked off at noon. USC, Michigan. Michigan has now seen an RPO. They've definitely seen an RPO after last week in Texas and that big loss. USC, a 5-point road favorite heading into the Big House. That's coming up, I believe, at 3:30 today, 4 o'clock.
Yes, yeah, it's like 3:34.
What is? I don't need to know the. I told you I don't need to know the score. 28-7 in the Ohio State game. I don't need to know that.
Yeah,
I did look it up. I don't care. They're going to win.
Yeah, they already have 3 touchdowns by Jeremiah Smith, something like that. I bet.
Yeah, talking about number one receivers. Talking about receiver recruiting.
Just reload every time. I'm excited to hear and kind of watch that game though. I think Michigan is in a bad way right now. They've graduated their entire offensive line. Donovan Edwards is not who we thought he was. I think Blake Corum and the offensive line masked that a little bit. and now you look around and it's like this offense is lackluster. There was really no competition against Texas of really any threat, and it was at Michigan. And Michigan played Arkansas, I believe it was Arkansas State last week, and they looked awful. Donovan Edwards hasn't went over like 80 yards rushing on the year, and he's supposed to be the NCAA cover athlete. It's not looking like this Michigan team has an ability to run the ball in an elite way, and they definitely can't pass it because Davis Warren got benched throwing 3 interceptions last week.
Yeah.
So, now you bring in Alex Orji. I'm curious to see how he's going to fare, but he's someone that's been there for a couple years and hasn't impressed enough to really get on the field. But it's kind of, for Michigan at this point, it's like, okay, we got to work with what we have.
Yeah.
And, Sharon Moore is not in a good position right now, and you're missing Jim Harbaugh, and that's some emotional leadership. As much as we all hate Jim Harbaugh, that's how much his players love him.
Yeah.
And that hurts when you take that away. So, I'm curious to see, but I think USC should handle them, but this is also a little bit of a heat check for USC.
Yeah.
Are they, Michigan, I guess there's that possibility they humble them, but I think USC is going to keep it rolling, and we're going to see, I don't know, maybe a top 10 matchup if all goes right going into USC. USC. I mean, that could be fun.
Yeah.
Close to it, at least close. Probably not top 10, but maybe like top 15.
Yeah. It should. I mean, where's Penn State right now? I think they're like 9th right now.
We're like 8, like 10, 9, something right around there.
As long as everything goes the way it should absolutely be a top 10 matchup out in LA. Another one that I'm interested in that I'll be keeping an eye on somehow at some point somewhere. Northwestern at Washington. I know nothing about the new Washington after Kalen DeBoer left, and Kalen DeBoer,
Kalen DeBoer's at Alabama.
Yeah, he's at Alabama now. So that is an entirely new team, an entirely new staff, an entirely new culture. They're on Penn State's schedule, and that's going to be an interesting one to see what that team looks like because they're off to obviously a good start, but this will be, I don't know if Northwestern's a test, but it's their first Big Ten test, I think.
Wait, yeah, so. They just dropped they just dropped the Apple Cup to Washington State. So, I mean, this is, I don't know, the Washington team, that's why I'm a little bit angry, man. I know hindsight is 20/20, but I think we have a bad Washington team, not bad, but not good Washington team coming to town for the whiteout.
That's right, they did.
And, they lost in the Apple Cup, So, Washington State team, that isn't, they're okay. There was a crazy game with them last night, I heard, but up to this point, it's like, I don't know. I'm just a little, I'm curious to see how that's going to go, but I wish we could have had this Illinois whiteout. It's going to be a huge game next week, and it's now going to be a 7 or 7:30 p.m. kick. Like I said, I know hindsight is 20/20, but it definitely hurts as of right now that we have a maybe 3:30 game being the whiteout against a mid-tier team in November when we could have had a September top 20 night game matchup against Illinois, but there was no way to know that. And I think if we would have picked Illinois before the season, some fans probably would have been mad. There's no way to know. You can't blame anybody.
Yeah. That was what I had in terms of the Big Ten schedule that I found interesting. I'm curious because you have an eye on all things football. Again, check out his Twitter because it's all things football, NFL, college, probably some high school.
I'm dropping a breakdown on why the Eagles' offensive line continues to have a legal man downfield, and it's not just because of the RPO. It is the blocking scheme that Jeff Stoutland brings and what he wants them to do on the double teams. But check that out at Landon Tangwall on Twitter.
What else is out there that you're interested in this week? Do you have anything else to cover?
Man, real quick, I know it was a week ago, but can we just talk about the Kentucky just allowing Georgia to escape?
Yeah.
And you were on their side of the field. I think they were on like the 45, maybe like 48-yard line, but they were on their side. You're down 1 point with a little over 3 minutes left, and you punt the ball away. I hate that. Why would you put, you have the number 1 team in the nation on the ropes at home, and you give them the opportunity to close out the game.
Yep.
I just think that's
Especially
wrong.
when you have been playing defense so well. You've done such a good job to that point. You're in the fourth quarter. They have not made an adjustment to your scheme that has gotten them a touchdown at this point, really, like that, or at least significant momentum in the game.
Yeah, and so that's for the most part, that's. He's either going to green light you, yellow light you, or red light you. Now, red light means you're going to be on the scout team. You're getting beat up by the starters all year long, and that is, you're basically staying home for all the away games. It's not a super good life, but that's a life that a lot of freshmen live. Now, yellow means you might be on the scout team. You might be working a little bit with the first team, second team offense or defense, but you're kind of in between. Maybe if someone gets injured, you got to be ready. But if you're green lit, that means you are going to burn your red shirt, and you're probably going to play a lot early on in the season. So we've seen that up to this point, and coming into the season, he greenlit 2 freshmen. He greenlit Dejon Lane, and he greenlit Cooper Cousins. And now so we saw both of them play a decent amount. Cooper Cousins is someone who I think is the most impressive because it is really difficult to be an offensive lineman in transit. It's just think about the physicality of going against the max was an 18-year-old, and now you're going against 15, 16-year-olds. Now you're going against maybe someone that's 24 years old, to be frank. Like, that's grown man strength. So really impressive that Cooper Cousins is doing that. I think it's a good sign that off the bat, Coach Franklin was confident in greenlighting Dejon Lane as well. Now with that Kevin Winston injury, that means he has a lot of confidence in his abilities. And now most recently, with the Andrew Rapplier injury, he has greenlit Luke Reynolds. And I think that is obviously a testament to what Luke has put in, and he's gotten a lot of praise from Tyler Warren, from Ty Howe. But also kind of out of necessity. So I know we talked about him earlier, but I'm excited to see what Luke Reynolds is going to continue to kind of provide as a younger guy in this offense, and see how he can block as well, because that's something that freshmen, as a tight end, you're not really used to blocking. It's not a good role, and they want you to block if you're playing tight end at Penn State. Yeah. And while we're talking about tight ends, I do just want to mention Tyler Warren. In his last 3 games, 2 out of his last 3 games, he's had over 100 yards receiving. He is really coming on as the best tight end in the nation and all around. There was a play last week. He caught about an out route, turned it up, broke a tackle. It was about 25, 30 yards against Bowling Green. And then next play, they pull him on a counter run, meaning it's the guard, and instead of the guard and the tackle, it was the guard and the tight end pulling. And he knocked the linebacker so hard that the linebacker fell down and knocked down another linebacker. So Tyler Warren is doing it at a high level receiving, and he's also doing it at a high level blocking. And that's not, like I said, it's not an easy thing for a tight end to be all in one, be an offensive lineman and be a wide receiver. And so I love what I'm seeing out of the tight end group, and I think Luke Reynolds being able to learn from Tyler Warren is really cool, and that goes all the way down from Tyler Warren learning from Pat Fryermuth and Brenton Strange, and it just kind of continues. So I think the tight end room's in a good place right now.
And it's something where you talk about the guys that came before him, Tyler Warren playing at a level in both of those areas that I think is higher than just about any of those guys, especially when you put it together. That, I think, is the impressive thing, and something that is that could make him, as we've talked about, the best tight end at Penn State in this recent run. The other thing I think is interesting, you talk about a freshman. There is a difference between a freshman that arrived here in May and a freshman that went through Chuck Losey's training program in the winter. Luke Reynolds is almost 250 now, so he's been putting in the work since January. It's almost been a full calendar year he's been here. So that does change the conversation with some of those guys, and that's why it's impressive. Dejon Lane, somebody who got here in like June, has really accelerated that learning curve. We're going to give our predictions coming up next on the Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships Tailgate Show, driven by Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships on 99.5 and 107.5 The Bus, Bigfoot Country Legends, and streaming on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. All right, let's get to our game predictions. The final nail in the show coffin to get us out of here for the weekend. Of course, we've got the Tailgate Show coming up at 12:30 on Saturday. Please tune in for that. We got a great show with former Penn State offensive lineman Landon Tangwall. So we're going to get to those conversations and break down the game even more. So it's not the last time you're going to hear from us, but it is the last time on the live show. So, Fitz, score prediction for this weekend.
Thank you to Ryan, who pointed out that Bowling Green was a good MAC team and much better than Kent State. Thank you for also not mentioning that I picked Penn State to win, cover, and blow out Bowling Green. Anyway, I expect Penn State to win, cover, and blow out Kent State. It is a big line for a reason. Kent State is probably the worst football team in the country. And you don't get any style points for winning this game, but a week after Tennessee beats them 71-1, I keep going back to this, Penn State and Tennessee are stacked in rankings, and this game is not meaningful for rankings as well. But if you can't just blow them out of the water like Tennessee did, people are going to look at that and say, I wonder what's up here. And do it meaningfully, run your stuff, run it successfully, get out of there as quickly as you can with as few injuries as you can. I don't think the points are easy to predict in this one because you just feel like they're going to be there. You get a pick six, you scoop a fumble and go. I think there was a strip sack last week. You've got freaky stuff that happens where these points add up. I've got 62-6, and I had to actually dig for that one. I couldn't remember what I predicted, but I think Penn State pretty cut and dry in terms of how much better they should be. They just got to run their stuff and be successful about doing it. And honestly, and you hate saying it, but like just keep going. Just keep going. Run your offense through the fourth quarter. If you got to get Bo and Grunk to throw some passes because they need reps, you got to do it. And it's just the downside, the part of the game that we don't like to talk about, but you got to do it.
Ryan.
Hey, I was right on one thing with Bowling Green. I said Gronk wasn't going to play, right? But that was a little different. Look, I do think maybe we could see Gronk this week. 63-7. Penn State covers normally in these situations. So 4-0, right? When we're a favorite of 40 or more. So we'll make them 5-0. We're predicting to be 5-0. We'll see what happens. But again, I laid out the stats earlier. The worst team as far as total yards on offense and defense. Lost to St. Francis.
By Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships. It's time to lock it up. You better lock it up. You lock it up. Lock it up. Here's the expert predictions for today's game.
Welcome to the final segment here on the Penn State Football Tailgate Show. I'm Thomas Reinkar. This is Landon Tangwell, former Penn State offensive lineman. We've gone through 80 minutes now, 85 minutes of conversation about the Penn State football team before a game against Kent State where I think we're both saying they're going to cover a nearly historic spread. So I don't want to pat ourselves on the back, but this has been a very interesting show for a game that maybe won't be that interesting by the fourth quarter. So let's get to our predictions and let's talk about it. What is your prediction for the game?
Yeah, my prediction, I'll go 63-6. I think they'll get 2 field goals, and I think what's that, like 9 touchdowns for us, something like that.
Yeah,
that's what I got for us. I think it is going to be utter domination. This is a defense that has really struggled up to this point with Kent State, and we saw against Tennessee last week, letting up 65 points by halftime. I have a bold prediction to add in to my prediction. Penn State has only rushed for over 300 yards once in the Nick Singleton, Katron Allen era. I think they will make it twice today.
That is, it's a lot of yards.
It's a lot of yards.
That's a lot of yards, but it's entirely doable. I chose 63-7 earlier this week. If you're watching the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel, you saw during the break where we're running some of our previous programming, the BWI live show, which goes Tuesday through Thursday, starting at 10 a.m. to 11. I picked 63-7. Then I watched the film, and I want to say it's going to be like 79-7.
Little Idaho action.
Little Idaho action, where I was shocked. It wasn't just that the football players weren't at the same level as Penn State. I was watching a run, and normally, like when I'm watching film, I'll go, okay, I understand what the point of this play is. I can understand what the coordinator was trying to do, and I can see where the mistake was. When I watched this run, I was like, that doesn't make any sense. They snapped the ball, and the guy that's the lead blocker is 4 yards behind the running back who they pitched the ball to out in the flat. So he ran right into a linebacker. There was nobody to block him. And that wasn't the player's fault. There was nobody to block him. What is that? What is that?
I'll tell you, it's a team that is inferior in their players, and then also as well as their coaches. So I think that when that combo happens, it is a recipe for a big-time blowout for Penn State.
So we mentioned Luke Reynolds. We mentioned a couple of the young players. Dejon Lane are very important. Are there other guys you're interested in watching today that you want to, it's 48-6 or whatever it is, and now we're seeing different players. Who are the different players you're interested in seeing?
Here we go. We'll go through this. Quentin Martin, I want to see get some reps at running back. I think Cam Wallace is the heir apparent at running back, though, and he's going to be the guy. He is really beloved around the facility. We'll stick on offense. Nolan Rucci. Saw him a lot at left tackle. That is his natural position. Mm-hmm. I'm not a big fan of moving offensive linemen out of their natural position. And, he played a little bit at right tackle. Anthony Donka seems like he might be the next dude on this offensive line. And, up to this point, there has been some other struggles across the board. I think if Rucci can provide a really big strength at left tackle where he doesn't, Drew Aller doesn't have to worry about his blind side, there's a possibility of him playing more there. Cooper Cousins is going to play a lot today. It could be left guard, right guard, center. You could see him all over the place. Flipping over to the defensive side, and these aren't really necessarily all younger dudes, but there's a couple guys I'm really interested in seeing. One, Tamir Robinson, someone that has been banged up to this point, and now he is going to be active today. So I'm excited. He's going to get a lot of reps, and someone that I think could also be the next guy at middle linebacker. Think Kobe King after 2021 when Ellis Brooks graduated, there was a question mark who's going to be at linebacker. Depending on what happens with Kobe, whether he stays or goes next year, there's a possibility that Tamir Robinson might need to step into that starting middle linebacker role. Be on the lookout for him. We talked about Dejon Lane, and then the depth at defensive line. just excited to see that. Smith Vilbert, see a couple, Amin Vanover, those guys get going and be able to create havoc on a bad offensive line for Kent State.
I'm interested in a lot of the similar players. I just want to make one comment about Tamir Robinson. He's a skinny 230. Like he is all elbows and knees, and he's developed. So I'm just fascinated to see what he looks like as a football player now, because he was a guy that played defensive end and safety in the same game in high school. So that's the guy that if you just take those two and divide it in half, that's middle linebacker from a placement standpoint. So we're going to see a bunch of those guys on the field today. I'm Thomas Frankard. That is Landon Tangwall. We're going to be back for our respective postgame show. You can check out the postgame show here on 99.5 The Bus after the game as well. Thank you for joining the Penn State Football Tailgate Show. We will be back next week, prime time, Illinois. We'll see you then.